Okay, well, I think we might as well start. So I'm starting with a very, very warm welcome to this encounter between Annett Gröschner and Katy Derbyshire. My name's Olga Grjasnowa. I'm a reader at the Institute of Modern Languages Research, and I'm going to host this evening. So let me say before we start that this encounter was conceived really in a particular context. It was actually meant to be part of a conference we ran on the 30th of April, and that conference was entitled COVID and the Woman Writer, and it was all about how women's writing was affected by the pandemic. So this explains why what we're going to do this evening is to first of all talk about Katy's and Annett's work before the pandemic, and then take a look at what has changed and texts that that they worked on since the pandemic. Also, the 30th of April has a particular significance, but we'll come back to that. Anyway, so first of all, I'll introduce both the author, Annett Gröschner, and the translator, Katy Derbyshire. While during the first part of this hour, or maybe hour and a half, I would like to ask you all to keep your microphones muted, please. Later on, if you have questions, please put them in the chat, and I'll pick them up. So Annett Gröschner is a writer who's at home in many genres. She's been called a city explorer, an archaeologist of the city, a walking archive, a seismograph of the city, and indeed her work digs very deep into the history of Berlin. And in whatever she writes, whichever way she writes, she captures the voices of the people who live in Berlin and their stories. And she does so in a huge variety of approaches, and also in a huge variety of media: historical essays, novels, audio files, features, travelogues, portraits, miniatures, theater scripts, newspaper columns, blogs, also theater work and exhibitions. So Annett has collaborated with a photographer and has documented the Berlin Wall, for example. The exhibition that resulted, Inventarisierung der Macht, was exhibited in Berlin, but it also, under the title Taking Stock of Power, was also shown in a gallery in New York. She also collaborates with a performance group, SheShe Pop, who put autobiographical texts on stage. Very often, Annett's focus is on women's lives, women's voices of all ages. She's interested in their history. For instance, she's recently published a book entitled Berolinas zornige Töchter, which is a history of the last 50 years of Berlin's women's movement. But she's also interested, as I was saying, in women's voices. She has written many texts that are based on interviews with women in old people's homes, for instance, but also voices of women, of younger women. She edited a teenage girl's diary of the years 1943 to 1945. And also in her novels, in her fictional work, very often we see the voices of people she interviewed, people she listened to, shining through. So I'm sure we'll come back to this. Annett has received many awards. She has had residencies, honorary positions, but the culmination, I think, came earlier this year in February, when she was awarded the Große Kunstpreis Berlin by the Akademie der Künste, the Academy of the Arts. And this prize is also called the Fontanepreis in honor of Theodor Fontane, the 19th century author who I think like no other, knew and loved Berlin and was able to capture, understand, and reflect upon the very core and characteristic of the city and its inhabitants. How extraordinarily fitting. Katy Derbyshire is joining us as well. And Katy was born in London, but now also lives in Berlin. She translates contemporary German writers and has published work in translation from Olga Grjasnowa's work, Sibylle Levicharow, Jan Brandt, Heike Geissler, Clemens, Meyer, and many others. In 2018, she was awarded the Strahlender Übersetzerpreis, Translation Prize, for Meyer's novel Im Stein, translated as Bricks and Mortar, and her work was shortlisted for the 2019 Best Translated Book Award. She also blogs and she co-organizes a monthly translation lab. Every 2 months, she co-hosts the Dead Ladies Show. There are, I think, 42 episodes to date, presenting women who were, I quote, in some way fabulous. And the choice really ranges across time, across language, profession, nations. The podcasts are available online. Katy is now also a publisher at the V&Q Books imprint, which exports remarkable writing from Germany to the UK and Ireland. So we'll pick up some of these threads later, but we have decided we would like to start with an example of Annett's writing and Katy's translation. Really just to, without many words about it, to get to the core of how Annett captures the essence of the city and its inhabitants, and to the core equally of how Katy renders this very special tone of Annett's writing. So we've decided to start with an extract from the novel Walpurgistag. Walpurgistag just means Saint Walpurga's Day. And the novel was published in 2011. And Annett, can I ask you to introduce the novel? Why this choice of title? What was behind this project?
Okay, thank you for introducing. I'm sorry, but a collateral damage of Corona is that I have not spoken English for 1.5 years, and so it is like, yes, I would like to switch between English and German. Sorry about. Yes, Walpurgistag. Walpurgistag. Yes, we have in German Walpurgisnacht. That is a night between the 13th of April and the 1st of May. And this is a witches' day. We have a mountain Harzbrocken, and there are the witches in the night of the Walpurgis. And that's and I wrote about the day. And so the title is Walpurgistag. And the story is, I wanted to write a novel about Berlin on one day, and all the objective things like weather, accidents, fires, events of the day should match, and I wanted to experience of the day from people who were in Berlin on this day, and that was in 2002, and not many people had emails. And so I had a post box in the post office for this. And I had many possibilities to get information from the people who were there in the day. And I got, I think, 100 letters and mails about this day. And I took only the dates, the fires and the accidents and so. And I take one story of one person, that is a woman. She is a pizza driver delivery.
Yeah.
Yeah, and her story I took one-to-one, but she was in Cottbus and not in Berlin. And I asked her if I can use the story, and she said yes. And the other stories are fictive. And I have, I think, 20 people who are in the story the whole day, more or some people the whole day, some people only 3 hours, or later, or between they make other things. And so, I have people from all parts of the town, but most of them are poor people. I have not a broker or so. It was the Walpurgisnacht was in the first years of the 2000s, and in the 90s, were a day of the struggle between police and autonomous use, left use, because they made the fire, Walpurgistag fire, and then the firefighters came, and then the police, and so had every year, I think for 10 years or so, struggles between police and youth on this day, and also on this day in 2002. Today, not. Today it is, I think it slept, it ist eingeschlafen. Der Kampf gibt's heute nicht mehr. But in 2002, we had this, and my lovely people of my novel are 3 old women, and they are between 80s and 90s, and they live in Prenzlauer Berg from birth. And one of the women lost her flat, and she had to change into a senior house. I don't know.
People's home.
Yes, people's home. I don't know. And she don't like it, and so they battle through the town, these people, and another woman is Anja Kober, and Anja Kober is one of the women or the main character of Moskauer Eis, my first novel. And she had a father, and the father is freezing in a freezer. It is a story of the first novel, but I have this both people in my second novel, and also in my third novel, and my fourth novel. They will be also, and the people is, the man is freezing.
Brilliant.
I think for a long time. Yes.
So the extract we have chosen to start with is, so we meet these 3 old women that you just mentioned. And it's probably quite, you said one of them lost their flat. It's probably quite important to mention that, of course, the background to all this is the process of gentrification of the Prenzlauer Berg.
Yes, it is the first wave of gentrification. Now we have I think the 3rd or 4th wave of gentrification. It was the time where the houses were renovated, and the old women had big flats, 2 big flats, and so they had to change the flat. But it was a problem because they were there for a long time, and it was a problem.
Okay, I think that's probably sets the scene quite nicely. So we will jump into short reading.
Frau Könke und Frau Menzinger erwarten die Neue, Teil 2, 13:45 Uhr. Frau Menzinger sieht auf die Straße, wo ein fahrerloses Auto im Halteverbot steht und den Möbelwagen behindert, der vor dem Haus halten will. Wie mein Hausbesitzer, offener Wagen, so ein Angeber-Cabriolet, habe ich ihm mal die Kacke von meinem Hund schön auf die Ledersitze drapiert. Ein paar Tage nachdem er gesagt hat, tütelt: Frau Menzinger, ich habe da eine schöne Wohnung für Sie, 2 Häuser weiter und nicht so weit oben. Stellte sich raus, das war ein Dreckloch, Hinterhof, Parterre. Die Sitze waren gelb, müssen Sie wissen, so ein ganz zartes Leder, sah schön aus. Ich hatte den Hund nämlich Möhrchen unter das Essen gerieben. Frau Könke: Wenn die alt sind, sind die heute jung in der Mehrzahl und fressen sich gegenseitig die Butter vom Brot. Frau Menzinger: Und drangsalieren die Jüngeren. Frau Könke: Machen Demonstrationen gegen die in Rollstühlen oder schlagen mit Gehstöcken auf Polizisten. Frau Menzinger: Weil sie nichts gelernt haben als demonstrieren. Heute werden sie sich bestimmt auch wieder zusammenrotten. Frau Könke: Wieso heute? Frau Menzinger: Na, wissen Sie denn nicht, welcher Tag heute ist? Ach, Sie haben ja nicht direkt am Platz gewohnt. Ich war da jedes Jahr mittendrin, sozusagen Loge. Jedes Jahr wieder am 30. April hat jemand Feuer gemacht auf dem Platz und jedes Mal wollte die Feuerwehr es löschen. Dann haben die Chaoten es wieder entzündet, dann kam eine Polizei, dann flogen Steine, dann spritzte Wasser und einmal haben sie so ja Tränengas benutzt. Da habe ich aber schön alle Fenster zugemacht. Sie müssen wissen, ich habe gleich am Platz gewohnt. Kann man von hier aus leider nur schwer sehen. Lehnen sich weit aus dem Fenster. Frau Menzinger: Kicken Sie mal da, das Kind springt einfach auf die Straße. Und wo ist die Mutter? Da, sitzt seelenruhig beim Kaffee und qualmt einer. Aber jetzt so aufspringen muss, fast zu spät ist. Sehen Sie, wie die ihr Kind anfasst? Als wäre es eine Puppe. Und jetzt gibt sie ihm Klaps auf den Po. Gab es da nicht gerade eine Gesetzesänderung, dass Züchtigung verboten ist? Frau Könke: Das arme Kind. Mit dem Urgroßvater war ich im kommunistischen Jugendverband. Frau Menzinger: Was, Sie kennen die? Kurzes Schweigen. Dass Sie Kommunistin waren, hätte ich nicht gedacht. Frau Könke: Nur kurz, meine Mutter war in Tillmann verliebt. Das war aber auch ein wirklich schöner Mann. Deshalb hat sie uns Mädchen bei den Kommunisten angemeldet. Vielleicht, weil sie dachte, dass wir dort eine gute Partie machen. War aber nicht so. Und dann hatte sich das ja auch bald erledigt mit all dem Zeug. Frau Menzinger verfällt noch stärker in ihren Dialekt. Ich fand den Tillmann nicht schön, der hatte so einen dicken Kopf. Naja, Vergangenheit. Über die Gegenwart muss man sich aufregen. Wenn ich schon diesen Kerl da sehe, sehen Sie den? Das ist der, dem der Cabriolet gehört. Das Männekind, was kostet die Welt? Eine Landmine müsste jetzt losgehen. Für das man uns Alte ins betreute Wohnen steckt, damit die unter sich sein können, in unseren Häusern. Frau Könke: Ach, Sie waren Besitzerin? Mussten Sie veräußern? Frau Menzinger: Quatsch, Besitzerin, Icke. Eine Wohnung, in der meine Familie seit 80 Jahren wohnt, das ist es nicht meine? Frau Könke: Die haben eine andere Auffassung von Eigentum wieder ins Recht gesetzt. Frau Menzinger: Die kommen hierher und führen ihre symbolische Ordnung ein. Frau Könke schaut sie fragend an. Was für eine Ordnung? Frau Menzinger: Heike lesen, fand ich gut, sag ich jetzt immer. Vor allem, wenn die ihren schlechten Kaffee für 3 Euro als Latte Matte weiß nicht was verkaufen.
1:45 p.m. Frau Könke and Frau Menzinger await the new arrival. Frau Menzinger, looking down at the street where a car is parked in a no parking zone in the way of the removals van trying to pull up outside the building. Like my landlord's open-top car, one of those swanky convertibles. I dropped my dog's doo-doo right on his leather seat one time, a few days after he said, patronising, Frau Menzinger, I've got a lovely flat for you, 2 doors down and not so many stairs. Turns out it was a right hovel, ground floor, no sunlight. The seats were yellow, Frau Könke, real soft yet leather. Looked gorgeous, what with I'd grated carrots into the dog's food. Frau Könke, by the time they get old, today's young folks will be the majority and they'll be jostling each other in the bread queue. Frau Benzinger, and pushing the younger ones around. Frau Kuhnke, holding demos against them in their wheelchairs or whacking cops with their walking sticks. Frau Benzinger, they've never learned anything apart from demonstrating. I bet they do another one of their riots tonight and all. Frau Kuhnke, why tonight? Frau Benzinger, don't tell me you don't know what day it is today. Ach, you never lived right on the square. I was right in the middle of it, front row seats. Every year on the 30th of April, someone came along and lit a fire on the square. And every year the fire engines came to put it out again. Then the rowdies lit it up again, and the police came along, then stones started flying, and they sprayed them with water. And one year they even used tear gas. You should have seen how fast I shut my windows. I used to live right on the square, you see. Sure, it's so hard to see from here. They lean out of the window. Menzinger, look at that kid there, just jumped out on the road. And where's his mother? Right there, sitting there, sipping her coffee and smoking. Butter wouldn't melt. Oh, now she's jumped up. Now it's nearly too late. Look at how she's grabbing hold of him like he's a china doll. And now he gets a smack on the bum. Didn't they just change the law so smacking's banned? Oh, Kuhnke, poor kid. I was in the Young Communists with his great-grandfather. Oh, Menzinger, what, you know them? Brief silence. I'd never have had you down as a communist. Frau Kuhnke, not for long. My mother had a crush on Ernst Thiermann. He really was a looker, though. That's why she signed us girls up with the communists. Maybe she thought we'd meet a nice man there. We never did, though. And then all that stuff was soon over anyway. Frau Menzinger, speaking even stronger Berlinerisch. I never fancied that Thiermann. He had such a big head. Ah, the past. It's the present that's worth getting it up about. The cheek of that bloke there, see him? That's the one with the convertible. What a little Lord Snooty, the rich bastard. A landmine, that's what we need right now. That's why they stick us old folks in sheltered housing, so they get the place to themselves. Moving into our houses. Frau Kuhnke, what, you owned a house? Did you have to sell up? Frau Menzinger, no, I never owned a brick. A house where my family's lived for 80 years, isn't that mine? Frau Kuhnke, they put a different kind of ownership back in the law. Frau Menzinger, coming over here, introducing their symbolic order. Frau Kuhnke, questioning look. Their what? Frau Menzinger, read it somewhere. Sounds good, eh? I say it all the time now, especially when they try and sell me a weak coffee as latte mackie whatnot for €3.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Annett, how did you get this voice? You know, is this something that comes from listening very closely, or is there something else that goes on?
I made many interviews with very old women in Prenzlauer Berg in the beginning of the 90s because I knew that there will be changing all, and there were the old people, and I thought, okay, I have to ask about her life, their lives, and so I met my, I think my second or third book were interviews with old women. The name was Jeder hat sein Stück Berlin gekriegt. And for this people in the novel, I took all of these interviews, and I think there were 20 or 30 interviews. And yes, this was a little bit like sauce to make 3 people from 30 or so, yeah. There is no person behind the figure. There are many persons.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
it's a condensation, is it, of character?
Yeah. And the Berliner dialect, all of the women spoke this. Now it is more or less dead, this kind of speaking.
Katy, So, of course, this dialect issue must be something very, very hard to decide how to tackle.
It is, because I don't feel comfortable just moving the action to a different place. So, and I think you can do that if it works, but I don't have a dialect of my own that I could recreate. So I tend to try and make up a kind of sociolect with markers in it, and use a lot of very colloquial speech like butter wouldn't melt and Lord Snooty. I'm a little bit nervous, a bit nervous reading that, because I translated it, especially for this, so it's unedited, and I can't tell if it works. I felt comfortable reading it though, so, and the special thing about this book is that it has this kind of dialogue format, as you saw in the, like almost like a stage play, as you saw on the shared screen. So the things like when she dials up the dialect, it just says so, which is very helpful for me. I don't have to mark that out specially.
I mean, it's funny you pick out the butter wouldn't melt, because that really stuck out for me, because that really is your own edition, isn't it?
A little bit. I mean, it has to sound like speaking. So any time you're translating dialogue, I have to do it freely, and to add that little bit of flavour into Annett's sauce. Add a little bit of butter is what works for me. Yeah. So
you manage in that way to convey a very strong character, a very, or three very strong characters. Do you visualize when you write?
Me?
Both of you. I mean, Annett, I was assuming you would. Is that right?
Yes, they live with me every day. Also today I have only Trude Menzinger, and she is a part of my fourth novel.
Trude Menzinger appears, of course, in other variations as well in your work. Yeah.
She is living with me.
Katy, did you realize? I mean, did you have a vision of that?
Well, I can hear their voices. I wasn't surprised when Annett read it to hear how she vocalized them, and I did. I have met a lot of women who spoke Berlin dialect over the years. When I was an exchange student in 94, 95, and in fact my professors in the German department at the Humboldt University also had at least Berlin accents. They weren't speaking dialects in class, but that was the way people spoke then, almost across the whole of society, which, as Annett says, has changed quite radically in a short time. So I can hear what they sound like in German. I don't know, there's no visuals to go with it, sadly.
Okay, so clearly this text, I think it's very clear that it's based on a very close encounter, very sensitive encounter with characters, with people who live in Berlin, who speak like this. And then, the connection of this, it's not just any old scene, this is a scene that really sort of goes to the heart of what happened to a particular area in Berlin, the changes to Prenzlauer Berg, which, as Annett just said, was then only in the beginning and has continued since. So we have the snapshot, something very, very immediate, but in juxtaposition with other snapshots, we get a very, very clear view of the changes that are happening in Berlin. So Annett, I wanted to ask you, you have spoken about Berlin as a palimpsest. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about that.
Yes, yeah. Berlin as a palimpsest. You have many layers in the town, no? Historical layers, and I don't know if you have in London this kind of maps. We have in Berlin or in Germany a site, a website, Histo Map Berlin is the name, and you have all maps of Berlin, and they are like a layer about. So you on the you see the first the map today, and then you can but a layer to 1892, and then you have the street in 1892, and a little bit you have it also in the present in Berlin. You have a house, and you can see it is from the 19th century, and you can see the streets and the way and the stones and so, and you have many layers of the history, and I say that this is a palimpsest, no? Like the old method to write
Parchment.
Yeah. And you can abkratzen. I don't know.
You can scratch off.
Yeah, scratch the old writing, and then you can write it new. And this is a palimpsest, and you can say Berlin is also a palimpsest. And I wrote about in the last book, Berliner Bürger, stuben. And the title is palimpsest.
To a certain extent, your writing is also an uncovering of this palimpsest, isn't it? Because it's writing about the different layers.
Yes, I read the layers, and then I write about, yes.
Yeah. And of course, that only works through walking through the city, listening to people, digging into the history of people, of places.
Archive. The archive.
The archives, absolutely, absolutely. So we're now coming to the part, what happens when you cannot walk around, you cannot just meet people and talk with them about it, you cannot visit the archives. How did the conditions that were imposed because of COVID-19, how did that change your writing practice?
Not my writing, because I can sit on the table and can write, but that's a problem, because I can write, but I also have to go outside, and I have to travel, and only both is part of my work. And now I had only the table, and then I said, okay, then I write only my novels, but I could not write my novels because of bad concentration. That was a problem. And I think I'm a chronicle person. I'm a chronist, and so I went into the streets, and I wrote about the life under Corona. And in this time, I had a columnist in the Volksbühne. Volksbühne, this big theater in Berlin, and I was a theater columnist, but there were no theater. I think in the last month I wasn't for a minute inside the theater. So I had to write about the life in Berlin under Corona, and so I wrote every month a column about Berlin and not about the Volksbühne.
But you did manage to connect it to the theater, didn't you? So.
Yes, I wrote one column. I wrote about the theater because the intendant were kicked off because of Me Too, and that was that's one column I wrote about the theater, and it was this. Yeah.
Let's move on to read one of those columns, and again I think it would be nice, Annett, if you could read the whole column, and then for Katy for the translation, we'll just pick out a few particular issues with the translation.
Yes.
So I'll share my screen. No, I will not share my screen right now, sorry. We'll do this without first. So yeah, we'll just listen to Annett reading her column, and then we'll speak about the translation.
It's a column of February 2021. Ausnahmezustand. Müdigkeit macht sich breit, wandert vom Kopf in die Glieder, selbst die Fingernägel wirken schläfrig, wenn ich sie nur ansehe. Wenn es noch länger geht, reichen die Haare bis in die Kniekehlen. Meine Mutter hat schon bei ihrer Friseurin angerufen und angekündigt, egal wann sie aufmachen, ich will die Erste sein. Wenn das Virus Schienbeine hätte, hätte sie schon längst dagegen getreten. So hat sie einfach beschlossen, ein Jahr länger zu leben. Wer weiß, vielleicht auch 2. Mein Vater drückt sich die Finger wund, um einen Impftermin zu bekommen, damit sie wieder ins Theater gehen können. Bleibt nur die Frage, ob das Theater ihnen den Gefallen tun darf, aufzumachen. Aber eine entschlossene Gruppe von AnwältInnen in Pension wird schon hinkriegen, dass Geimpfte nicht länger unter die pandemiebedingten Einschränkungen der Grundrechte fallen. Wenn die Impfungen sich weiter verzögern, kann das ja noch heiter werden. Der Kartenverkäufer Eventim hat angekündigt, nur Geimpfte in Konzerte zu lassen. Ein Autor hat neulich öffentlich gefordert, Männer zuerst zu impfen, weil der sogenannte Männerschnupfen doch etwas Ernstes wäre. Medizinisch kann ich das nicht einschätzen, aber die sozialen Konsequenzen dessen stehen mir deutlich vor Augen. Die geimpften Männer verschwinden auf die Piste, die Frauen bleiben im Homeschooling oder Office zurück und kriegen dann noch zu hören, dass sie sich gehen lassen zu Hause. Heimarbeit war schon immer schlecht für Frauen, unter anderem, weil es lange keine Gewerkschaft gab, die sich der Rechte der in den Privatwohnungen verstreuten Mantelnäherinnen und Weißwäscherinnen annahm. Gehören solche Berufe heute bis heute zu den Leichtlohngruppen. Entschuldigung. Seitdem dem Ausnahmezustand die Ausnahme gestrichen worden ist, habe ich seltsame Anwandlungen. Vor 2 Wochen kam ich an der Schönhauser Allee an einer Geigerin und einem Klarinettisten vorbei. In früheren Zeiten hätte ich gesagt, sie spielten gut, aber nicht brillant. Jetzt reicht es aus, Live-Musik zu hören, um vor Rührung zu weinen. Ich konnte bis zur Ecke Wiechert nicht mehr aufhören. An einem anderen Tag hatte ich das unbändige Bedürfnis, in die Nationalgalerie zu gehen und nur ein einziges Gemälde anzusehen. Vom Theater zu schweigen. Onkel Vanya im Netz kam mir wie eine Direktübertragung aus der Familienquarantäne vor. Der Ausnahmezustand ist zum Zustand geworden, dessen Dauer niemand absehen kann, zumal wir ein neues Wort lernen müssen. Fluchtmutanten. Die Antwort des Virus auf unsere Immunität. Wer kann sie aufhalten, außer ein fortdauernder Lockdown? Inzwischen macht selbst mir das Spazierengehen keinen Spaß mehr. Ich kenne schon jeden Friedhof im mit dem Fahrrad bequem zu erreichenden Umkreis. Mir scheint, dass es mehr frische Gräber gibt als vor einem Jahr, als ich anfing, regelmäßig über die Friedhöfe zu spazieren. So viele Tote und jeder hat eine Geschichte. Schon immer fiel es mir schwer, mir eine Menschenmenge räumlich vorzustellen. Als es 22.000 Tote waren, am 27. November, dachte ich, dass es genauso viele sind wie das bis auf den letzten Platz besetzte Stadion an der Alten Fürsterei. 2 Monate später sind wir bei der Größe der Mercedes-Benz Arena in Stuttgart, in die über 60.000 Menschen passen. Das größte Fußballstadion der Bundesrepublik ist das Signal Iduna Stadion in Dortmund mit 81.365 Plätzen. Ich fürchte, das reicht nicht aus bis zum Ende der Pandemie. Now we have 90.000. Letzte Woche war ich bei der Beerdigung meiner Nachbarin. Regina Nessweber starb mit 77 Jahren an Corona. Einsam in einem Krankenhaus, nachdem wir im Sommer den Rettungswagen geholt hatten und sie vom Krankenhaus gleich ins Pflegeheim kam, wo sie sich ansteckte. Angehörige hatte sie nicht. Ich war bis zu ihrem Abtransport fast jeden Tag an ihrer Wohnungstür, um im Abstand einer Schwelle mit ihr 2, 3 Sätze zu wechseln, aber trotzdem habe ich wenig erfahren über ihr Leben. Sie war keine Plaudertasche. Ich weiß nicht, wie sie das ausgehalten hat, mit dem ganzen Smalltalk als Friseurin im Salon Dorit in der Greifenhagener Straße, in dem sie Jahrzehnte arbeitete. Sie hatte eine schöne, dunkle Stimme, die wunderbar berlinernd Mene Kleene sagen konnte, wenn ich ihr die Post brachte. Ich war einen Kopf größer und doppelt so schwer wie sie. 50 Jahre wohnte Regina im Haus, 40 Jahre mit ihrem Mann, der 2011 mit 97 Jahren starb. Anfangs konnten sie die Fenster nicht öffnen, weil der Dreck des Gaswerks sich in alle Ritzen setzte. Als die Gasometer im Juli 1984 gesprengt wurden, waren sie im Garten im Müggelheim, wie jeden Sommer. Bis zuletzt, als sie nicht mehr aus der Wohnung kam, weil sie wegen ihres schwachen Herzens die Treppen nicht mehr schaffte, machte sie sich schön. Kajal um die Augen, Rouge auf die Lippen, die Haare wie Zuckerwatte. Bei angenehmerem Wetter saß sie auf dem Balkon und beobachtete den Fernsehturm. Manchmal redete sie mit ihm, sie war da keine Ausnahme, das machen viele. Im Frühling verschwand der Fernsehturm aus ihrem Blickfeld, weil am Ringbahngraben ein neues Haus errichtet wurde, das wieder Dreck und Staub brachte, wie schon am Anfang ihres Lebens Dreck und Staub ihr Begleiter waren, als um sie herum Kreuzberg in Schutt und Asche versank. Sie wuchs im Luftschutzkeller auf, bis die Mutter mit ihr aus der zerstörten Innenstadt nach Wilhelmsruh zum Großvater zog. Der Vater war nur zum Zeugen aus der Schlacht nach Haus gekommen, kehrte dahin zurück und blieb vermisst. Meine Nachbarin hat ihren Mädchennamen behalten. Falls er doch noch nach Berlin zurückgekommen wäre, sollte er sie finden. Die Geschichten meiner Nachbarin habe ich an den Tagesspiegel geschickt, der als einziger eine virtuelle Seite hat, auf der der Corona-Toten gedacht wird. Ich weiß nicht, ob es so gut ist, dass wir die Toten nicht sehen, dass sie abstrakt bleiben, dass wir keinen Ort des Gedenkens haben für sie, dass wir ihre Hand nicht halten können. Wir sehen weder die Toten noch das Sterben. Niemand bekommt blaue Lippen und fällt vor uns an der Kasse um. Kein Hautausschlag zeigt die Infektion an. Die Krankenhäuser und Pflegeheime bleiben abgeschirmt und nur selten bekommen wir ein Bild von der Menge der Gestorbenen. So bei den Bildern der von Särgen verstopften Trauerhalle in Meißen. Das war bei der spanischen Grippe vor 100 Jahren ähnlich. Jedes Wort, jedes Dorf, jeder Stadtteil hat einen Gedenkstein für die Toten des Ersten Weltkriegs, aber kein Ort ein Denkmal für die Grippetoten. Dabei waren es viel mehr, zwischen 20 und 50 Millionen in der Welt. Wahrscheinlich, weil es keinen sichtbaren Kampf gab, keinen Feind, den man heroisch mit dem Seitengewehr erstechen konnte. Und man es für eine Laune der Natur hielt, die männlichen Toten des Krieges durch eine Seuche, die mehrheitlich junge Frauen und Kinder dahinraffte, auszugleichen. So hatten es mir die alten Berlinerinnen begründet, die mir Anfang der 90er Jahre von der Grippe erzählten, die ihnen die Mütter und Geschwister genommen hatte. Sie hatten sie nicht vergessen, das Kollektiv schon. Bundespräsident Steinmeier hat vorgeschlagen, dass wir Kerzen für die Toten in die Fenster stellen sollten. Das Mittel ist seit dem Mauerbau verbraucht, aber vielleicht haben viele in der Stadt ihre Weihnachtsbeleuchtung in diesem Jahr viel länger als üblich in den Fenstern gelassen, um Trost zu spenden. In Berlin gibt es seit einigen Wochen einen stillen Ort des Gedenkens, eine Privatinitiative, Corona-Tote sichtbar machen. Eigentlich Hashtag Corona-Tote sichtbar machen, um an die Toten zu erinnern. Es ist ein bisschen seltsam, dass sie sich ausgerechnet den Stierbrunnen auf dem Arnsweiler Platz ausgesucht haben, der mit seinen wuchtigen Porphyrelementen schon immer aussah wie ein Kriegerdenkmal und viel zu groß ist für den Platz. Auf dem Treppenpodest flackern und blinken, wenn man in der Nacht daran vorbeikommt, schon von Weitem die roten Grablichter. Jeden Sonntag kommen Leute hierher und erinnern sich an die Toten und stellen neue Lichter dazu. Aber welche Antworten werden die Theater finden? Das Staatstheater Darmstadt hat Ende Januar für ein paar Tage den Sterberaum des Künstlers Gregor Schneider auf die Bühne geholt. Das Motto kam von Heiner Müller. Eine Funktion von Drama ist Totenbeschwörung. Der Dialog mit den Toten darf nicht abreißen, bis sie herausgeben, was an Zukunft mit ihnen begraben worden ist. So Heiner Müller. Schneiders Sterberaum hatte vor ein paar Jahren für einen Skandal gesorgt, weil der Künstler in dem Raum jemanden öffentlich sterben lassen wollte. Es braucht es diesen öffentlichen Tod gar nicht mehr, um Wirkung zu erzielen. Die Leere füllt sich von selbst mit Erinnerungen. Bei mir war es die an Bert Neumann und seine spartanisch ausgestatteten Bungalows auf den Volksbühnen. Werden die Toten der Corona-Pandemie durch die kommenden Stücke geistern wie Rosa Luxemburg im Landwehrkanal oder Medea am Grund des Sees bei Strausberg?
Okay, thank you very much. We should probably go straight into the having a look at the translations as well before we talk about the text as a whole. So I will just choose the beginning and a few of the other texts that we can have a look at. So of course, first of all, we have to talk about this, the title. Annett, can you explain what you did there, first of all, before we get to the translation?
Yes, I would say that it is not a Ausnahmezustand, it is a Zustand, a state, and not a state of emergency. And so
yeah, so it's a play of word which hides or reveals a deeper truth in a way. And Katy, how did you deal with this?
It doesn't quite overlap one-to-one because the Zustand suggests permanence, and state has actually a much broader meaning. But let's hope it works to some extent just by crossing out the emergency and having it as state, and then including our state of mind, the German state, the state of play, and that's
it, isn't it? The German state, it adds another layer, doesn't it?
Yeah, which is not wrong, I hope.
No, exactly. I think it works extremely well. But it's really interesting, isn't it? You're looking at two words or one word, and already there's so much change going on there. So this is the first. This was the first paragraph. Katy, can you read it for us, please?
Tiredness spreads, wanders from my head to my limbs, even my fingernails looking sleepy when I glance at them.
Oh, sorry. Oh dear, I'm sorry.
If this goes on much longer, my hair will come down to my knees. My mother already called her hairdresser and announced, no matter when you open, I want the first haircut. If the virus had shins, she'd have kicked them by now. She's simply decided to live a year longer. Who knows, perhaps two.
I chose this because of the rhythm, the sentence structure. But I thought that worked extremely well.
I like that. If the virus had shins, she'd have kicked them by now. I don't know if there's a name for that rhythm. I'm not so strong on meters, but it sounds like a poem.
It does, doesn't it? Yes. And I think that comes through in the translation really well. Okay.
A writer recently made a public call to vaccinate men first, claiming so-called man flu is a serious matter. I can't judge in medical terms, but I can well imagine the social consequences. The vaccinated men bugger off on a drinking binge, and women stay behind to school and or work from home, only to be told they're letting themselves go to seed. Working in the home has always been bad for women.
Yes. So what I thought was interesting here was, so Annett's original was Die Männer verschwinden auf die Piste.
Yeah, it's much more, it's ruder in English, it's cruder, but auf die Piste is kind of a euphemism, and I had to decide exactly how to interpret it, and so I made them bugger off on a drinking binge. Verschwinden is one of those German words meaning literally vanish, which is used very, very often in it's like, you know, when we're not talking about stage magicians, but just normal people vanishing. So it has actually more colloquial tinge to it than the direct translation would indicate. And I'm going to stand by that, bugger off.
Absolutely. I think it's exactly what you say. It's an example where the word for word translation doesn't work. You know, the vanish wouldn't do it.
No. There may have been a little bit of anger sounding through.
Yeah.
I like the sentences. The vaginated men bugger off on a drinking binge.
Good.
Yeah. And just one more.
This is the saddest part. Last week, I went to my neighbour's funeral. Regina Nessweber died of coronavirus at the age of 77. All alone in hospital after we'd call an ambulance in the summer, and she went straight from hospital to a care home where she caught the virus. She had no relatives. I knocked at her door almost every day before she was taken away, exchanging a sentence or two at a distance on her threshold. But still I learned little about her life. She wasn't a chatty woman. I don't know how she coped with all the small talk as a hairdresser at Salon d'Orwood on Greifenhagener Straße, where she worked for decades. She had a lovely dark voice with a gorgeous Berlin accent. She'd call me meine Kleine when I brought up her post from the mailbox in the hall. Little, and I was a head taller than her and twice her weight.
Yeah. That's great. And I was wondering there about your choice. You know, when you have this quote, meine Kleine, what do you do with it? You know, you can't assume that your English reader knows what it is. So what, yeah.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to leave it, because often with dialect, if we don't have a direct dialect equivalent of the German, I'd love to leave it in there. I think it's a real person, in this case, a real person's voice and her real choice of words, and they look crazy on the page, all those E's. And I thought, okay, I'm going to hope that the readers can just live with the tension of not understanding that for the length of 8 words or whatever it is, and then have this little gloss little in to explain the joke that comes straight afterwards.
And that works extremely well, because it doesn't disrupt the text. It just adds, but it goes in the flow of the text, doesn't it?
I hope so. Yeah.
As I like it, because it's double meine Kleine and little.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I saw, Katy, I think you posted about the lovely dark voice.
I did. I wanted to see what people, if everybody else imagined the same thing when they heard the is it dunkle Stimme? I think it is.
Schöne dunkle Stimme.
Yeah. And so I asked on Twitter, and people, I said, what do you hear when you read that? And I think it was kind of a Marlene Dietrich kind of thing, which I mean, I then did translate it very directly, but that worked for me then to know that everybody else was hearing Marlene Dietrich, and if I can put it into English, and the English for me then re-describes the same sound, then it works. So in fact, it was was like going into 15 shoe shops and then going back to the first and buying the first pair of shoes. But I felt more comfortable with my choice after that.
It's a bigger problem, isn't it? This kind of so your readership doesn't have, it's not about words only. Your readership doesn't have the cultural background necessarily. So you have to transport quite a lot more than the words.
Right, especially with a lot of Annett's work, which is so closely tied to Berlin and very much about Berlin, but it's not explaining the city for outsiders necessarily. I think you could read it when you don't live here, but she's not going to make it easy for you by breaking it down. So that's the question that I have to ask myself. Okay, can I explain this without interrupting? Does it need explaining? Will it just weigh the text down and make it kind of like Annett for tourists, which I don't want. I want to keep Annett's voice and not make it too easy for the readers, but also not, I don't want it to be impenetrable, and I do want people to see what I love about it and to be able to picture something.
So you don't have any hard and fast rules about how you do it. You decide that on a case by case.
Absolutely. With a lot of sort of quick thinking and sometimes there is, I do a little bit of research and sort of canvas people to see if they know what on earth this thing is. But I think that's actually fairly common for translators to do. I think that often on social media, people saying, "What, have you ever heard of this particularly Belgian thing," or whatever. Ideally you want everyone to say, "Oh yes, of course," but quite often they haven't. So you do have to find a way to help people understand without sort of footnoting or plotting too heavily. Something I don't want to do.
So I love these questions on social media, because I learned many about translation.
It's a great group of friends out there who can help. Yes. But that sort of ties in with your general approach, Katy, to translating, and you're very keen, aren't you, to preserve the oddities and not to sort of level it all down. And I really liked your your theoretical is too theoretical a word, but the idea of translating that you have when you say, your question was, how do you want to be wrong, and what do you want to be faithful to? I think it's a recognition that you'll always be wrong in some way.
Right. I mean, that was a question I stole actually from another translator. I think her name is Mina Kandasamari. I've forgotten her surname. Kandasamari or something like that. Embarrassing. Who said yes, who acknowledges, that languages and cultures simply don't overlap one to one. So there will be something that is not what we call faithful. And as long as I can make conscious decisions about what I want to emphasize and what I think can fall by the wayside, I'm happy to do that. It's clear, I think, when we talk about poetry translation, because there the constraints are so clear. We've got maybe rhyme or meter or alliteration, or there's such a kind of barrage of factors that from the very beginning when you're translating poetry, you're going to have to let something go. But I feel like that applies just as much to prose.
I'd like to pick up a question from the chat. Georgina is asking, Annett, she says, I think of you as one of the great social historians of post-unification Germany. And it is interesting to hear you describe yourself as a chronist. Given you write in different genres, I'd like to hear what you think the advantages, if any, of the genre of the novel are for a writer with the chronicler's impulse.
Ich versuche gerade noch.
Or maybe put differently, what can the novel do that other forms of writing cannot do, perhaps?
I think I have more freedom if I write a novel, because in some other genres, it's a question: is it real or is it not real? And the question of footnotes or not, and so. And in the novel, I have all freedom to write about also history topics, but I have more freedom also for the language, for my speech also.
Yeah. So do you want, I mean, maybe this is a moment to tell us a little bit about your new novel that you are currently writing?
Can you?
So you are writing a novel at the moment.
Yes. I'm writing for 10 years or so. I'm so slowly to write novels. I write about a family of women in East Germany who worked in a fabric, in a steel fabric, and
in a factory, yeah.
In a factory, and about the living in East Germany and post-East Germany, post-socialist Germany, and yes, it's difficult.
But you know what you're saying there, it's difficult, and you also said earlier, you know, difficulties with concentration under lockdown. Those are echoes of our conversations that we had at the conference, you know, the COVID and women's writing. It's something that we were really struck to find. You know, we had people coming from all over the world to this conference, and they all were saying, you know, this problem with concentration, you know, is really hampering their work. And another thing that really stood out was that there was a general feeling we are in danger of already forgetting what it was like. And you know, this real need to chronicle, this real need to record of what's, you know, how we have changed, what is happening to us in lockdown. And I think, you know, the texts, the column text that you read does that so well. You know, it's really giving us not only a chronicle, not only a record of where we are, but also going back in history, going to the palimpsest, going to the history of this character. So it's the memory that you know, that is being kept, that is really, really so important. And then the third thing that kept coming up at the conference was emotion. You know, the emotions triggered in lockdown, and how do we put them down? How do we record them? And you know, in your piece, you know, the way you were so touched by the music, I think that is a particular moment that is to do with, you know, with the special conditions we live under.
It's very interesting to see the similarities between the Spanish flu and the cholera in Berlin. And so also the time, the different time of speaking about pandemic and think about pandemic. To say, okay, we have no pandemic, or there's an enemy, a French enemy, or something else, enemy who brought it, and all these things are similar, and that's interesting also. Yeah. And to forget a pandemic, the next generation forgets this, and this, or doesn't remember it, do not remember. And this is interesting, and I think it is a time for short stories and for snapshots, really short sentences about, and not so long.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that was very much the consensus that came out of the conference. But it, at first it seems counterintuitive, because you have time to write a novel.
Yeah.
But it doesn't work like that.
Travels.
Yeah. If there are any other questions, please put them into the chat now. Oh, there's something here. Steph Morris. Great to hear dispatch from Berlin, my former home, in this disconnected time. Question to both of you. In a time when it's been hard to keep up with what's going on in our own cities, have you managed to keep up with friends and contacts in other cities and other countries? And if so, how? And what parallels or differences have you noticed?
Shall I start so you have a little bit of time to think, Annett? So Steph is a dear friend of mine who has been very good at keeping in touch with me, and is one of very few people who I have managed to keep in touch with during the pandemic, because I found that my working from home all the time with my family around me has really narrowed my horizons, and I haven't had the emotional space to spend a lot of time with anyone other than my family, really. I mean, including my family in the UK, who I haven't been able to see. And I think that is, I'm trying not to feel too bad about that, because I think that has happened to a lot of people. There are huge numbers. I mean, that I'm hoping that that's one parallel, that everybody has kind of closed down, battened down the hatches, and closed down their social lives, and it's not just me. And I hope we can manage to reach out to people again now that things are opening up without feeling guilty. I'm going to have to just contact people and say, I'm sorry I haven't been in touch, and hope that they say, sorry, we haven't been in touch. Yeah.
Annett?
I think it was not so much contact with others, more with family. I have a part of my family in other towns and in Germany, and there are many similarities, but also other, I don't know how to say it. One, for instance, ich komme gerade nicht drauf.
Say it in German, we'll help.
Ja, es ist auch in Deutsch nicht so einfach. Also es gab in jedem Bundesland andere Verbote, Gebote, Förderung von Kultur zum Beispiel. Und das war ein großer Unterschied auch zu Berlin. Also in Berlin gab es viel mehr Kulturförderung auch.
There've been different rules in every German land, and that makes things difficult or to compare. Yeah.
I have many friends in other German land states, and they had many problems because of money and as freelancer.
Yes, the precarity of certain jobs was very serious. Yeah. Okay, I think we'll take one last question. So Krista is asking, she's saying, it's so illuminating for me to hear the translator Katy read her translations. One really hears the cadence that evokes the strong Berlin personalities in Annett Gröschner's writing. But as an American, I would not have picked up on this when reading the English version. Are audiobooks in the works? And could you speak to some of the challenges in reaching a wide English-speaking audience?
That's the terrible thing that this, when I'm translating dialect into sociolect, it flattens on the page, and the only way I can find to bring it out again is to read it out loud. And so I assume that other British English speakers will hear some version of that butter would melt and associate it with, maybe their grandparents, the way I do with mine. But I don't think every text can reach English-speaking readers in the UK, India, Australia, and America in the same way. And there are some which I think are not as problematic from that point of view. But as soon as there's a kind of a spoken aspect, the translated fiction is not the best carrier, I think. It would be lovely to do audiobooks. I would love to do it.
Great. Yes.
And I know that in the UK, Fitzgerald Editions are doing audiobooks of a couple of their novels, which are read by either the writers themselves or the translators. Antonia Lloyd-Jones has read an audiobook of one of her writers, and it's wonderful. That's the first time it's happened, I think, that a translator has read an audiobook. But then again, not even every writer can do it. It's really hard. I'm not sure if I could do it either. It would be delightful.
Yeah, it would be wonderful. Okay, I think we should call it a day here, but I'd like to really thank you again, both of you. It's been great talking to you, and I'm really glad also that you've brought out some of the difficulties of capturing moments and bringing them on the page, both before and of course now under pandemic circumstances. So thank you very much. I hope we'll soon see the new novel, Annett.
Yes. And you will see us in London. And
yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Yes. We'll do a proper...
And sorry for my bad English.
Don't be sorry. No. I mean, I think in normal circumstances we would have been able to do this in German. The reason we chose not to was because it was part of that conference, and the conference was open to people from absolutely everywhere. So we wanted to make sure that people can hear about your writing that don't necessarily.
It's good for me.
Okay. Anyway, thank you both. Thank you very much.